The storm hit Montana like the end of the world. In the middle of that freezing night, a homeless man found a wounded horse trembling beside the railroad tracks, and instead of walking away, he took off his coat and covered her. No one saw them that night. No one heard the harmonica he played to calm her. But by spring, the whole town would remember their names. The wind howled across the freight yard like a lost voice. The sky above Livingston, Montana, was the color of steel, heavy, breathless, and cruel. Walt Mercer crouched beside a rusty oil drum, coaxing a flame from scraps of cardboard. He looked like a man who had been forgotten by both God and memory, shoulders hunched beneath a torn coat, eyes pale with frost and fatigue. Behind him, his old pickup truck sagged on flat tires, its bed filled with nothing but tools from another life and a folded blanket that smelled faintly of tobacco and rain. When the train whistle blew in the distance, Walt raised his head. That sound, long, mournful, carried him back to the nights when he still had a workshop, when the smell of leather and saddle oil filled his lungs. But the past was another country, one he no longer had a passport to enter. He rubbed his hands together, breathing into them for warmth. Then he heard it. Faint, broken, almost swallowed by the storm. A sound that didn't belong to the wind. It came again. A muffled cry, followed by the sharp scrape of metal on ice. Walt froze. Instinct more than reason moved his legs. He grabbed his lantern and stepped into the dark. Snow whipped at his face as he crossed the yard. He followed the sound, his boots crunching through the crusted ice, until he saw a shape, trembling by the wire fence. A horse, thin as a shadow, her flank cut by a loose strap, steam rising from her nostrils in uneven bursts. The creature tried to back away, eyes rolling white, but the effort only tangled her reins tighter in the fence. Easy now. Walt's voice cracked, the first words he'd spoken to anything living in days. He held out a hand. The horse flinched. Her right eye was cloudy, the other filled with a quiet terror. "It's okay, girl. I'm not going to hurt you." He took off his coat and draped it over her back. She quivered, then went still, her breathing slowing as if the warmth of the fabric reminded her of something she once knew. For a moment, the storm seemed to hold its breath. Walt studied her, ribs showing beneath dull hair, one hoof bleeding where the shoe had twisted. Whoever had owned her had stopped caring long before tonight. He felt a weight press into his chest, a mix of pity and something else he hadn't felt in a long time. Responsibility. "Looks like it's just you and me, huh?" he murmured. The horse flicked her ear, listening. He almost smiled. "We'll figure something out." He cut the strap with his pocket knife and led her, step by careful step, toward the underpass, where his fire still burned. Each gust of wind felt sharper now, but somehow lighter, as if carrying a purpose. When they reached the shelter, he spread his blanket on the frozen ground and coaxed the animal to lie down. She resisted, then finally sank, exhausted, her breath misting in the dim light. Walt pulled the harmonica from his pocket, a relic of his wife, gone 10 winters ago, and lifted it to his lips. The tune that came out was rough, trembling, but full of yearning. Wayfaring stranger drifted through the night, carried by the snow. The horse raised her head, ears twitching. For the first time, Walt noticed she wasn't afraid. She was listening. He smiled through the steam of his breath. "You got taste, girl." The wind eased, and the flame danced steadier. The freight yard, usually a place of silence and rust, now held two living beings bound by the same need: warmth and the faint, reckless hope that tomorrow might still mean something. Outside, the train whistle cried again, fading into the white distance. Walt leaned his back against the concrete pillar, watching the mare's slow, rhythmic breathing. "We'll rest here tonight," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Tomorrow, we'll see." The horse's ear twitched once more, as if she understood. And somewhere in that frozen Montana night, two broken souls, one man and one horse, began the quietest rescue the world would never hear about. Snow kept falling through the night, turning the freight yard into a pale ocean of silence. When dawn crept over the hills of Montana, the world looked like it had been erased and drawn again in shades of silver. Walt Mercer woke stiff and sore, his breath clouding in the cold air. The fire had died to ash, but beside him, the horse still lay breathing, slow and steady. Her head rested against the blanket he'd given her, one ear twitching at every distant sound. He sat up and rubbed his hands together. "Morning, girl," he said softly. The horse blinked, nostrils flaring. Walt took that as a kind of answer. Outside the underpass, the snow had crusted into thin glass. His boots cracked through it as he scouted around. The freight tracks were empty. He found a half-frozen puddle and filled an old tin can, bringing the water back to her. The horse drank, each gulp a rasping sound that somehow warmed him. "You're tougher than you look," he muttered. When the wind picked up again, he guided her deeper beneath the bridge where the concrete walls broke the gusts. The hum of tires from the highway above sounded distant, like another life. Walt tore open an old feed sack he'd scavenged weeks ago, mostly straw and dust now, and spread it beneath her to dry the ground. She lowered herself slowly, bones creaking. Walt leaned against a support beam, looking at her in the dim light. There was something noble about her even now, even in ruin. He studied the scar that traced her left flank, the faint tremor, in her back leg, the cloudy film in her eye. She wasn't young, but she wasn't finished either. Neither was he. He took out his harmonica again. His fingers shook from the cold, yet the first notes came easier this time. The melody rolled low and gentle, echoing beneath the bridge. The mare raised her head, watching him. For a long while, they just stayed like that. A man and an animal, wrapped in the same kind of loneliness. "Guess you need a name," he murmured, after the last note faded. "Can't keep calling you girl." He thought for a moment, then looked toward the faint outline of the pine trees beyond the bridge. Their needles trembled under the frost, dark against the pale sky. "Juniper," he said. "That fits you. Strong, stubborn, grows in any dirt." The horse blinked once, as if approving the choice. Walt smiled. It was the first time his face had remembered how to. As the day wore on, the snow began to melt slightly, turning the edges of the road into thin rivulets. Walt gathered bits of wood and trash, anything that could feed a new fire. He built it carefully, feeding the flame until it held steady. The warmth filled the small space, turning the mist of their breaths golden. A couple of truckers stopped on the highway to look down at the underpass. A ragged man, a horse wrapped in an army blanket, smoke curling up like a prayer. Walt ignored them. The world could stare all it wanted. For the first time in years, he had something that depended on him. By dusk, he knew they couldn't stay here forever. The temperature would drop again, and the city workers would come through clearing debris. He looked toward the abandoned rail yard a mile away. There were old cars, some wooden crates, maybe shelter enough for another night. He gathered his few belongings, the harmonica, the blanket, a small tin of ointment he used on his own hands. Then he stood, brushing off the snow from his coat. "All right, Juniper," he said. "Time to move." The mare hesitated, sniffing the air. When he tugged gently on the reins, she followed, limping but determined. Her breath came in puffs that caught the dying light. They passed under the bridge and into the open, where the last gold of the sun spilled over the mountains. Walt glanced back once, the bridge, the ashes, the lonely fire fading behind them. It looked like a grave of all the nights he'd given up on himself. Ahead, the rails stretched silver into the horizon. "Come on, girl," he whispered, his voice soft but certain. "Let's find us a better place." And so they walked together into the deepening twilight, one set of boot prints and one trail of hoof marks merging in the snow. A man and his horse, heading toward the unknown. The town lights flickered faintly in the distance, and far beyond that, the faint scent of coffee drifted on the wind. Walt didn't know it yet, but the next stranger they'd meet would change everything. By the second, morning, the world had turned to glass. Every tree branch along the road wore a coat of ice that caught the sunlight like broken mirrors. Walt's breath clouded the air as he trudged through the snow, leading Juniper along the edge of the highway. Her limp was worse now. Each step left a dark patch of blood on the white crust. He kept glancing down, guilt tugging at him, but they had to move. The rail yard had run out of warmth, and both of them were running out of time. Ahead, a wooden sign swung in the wind. North Wind Diner. The paint had peeled to the color of bone, but the windows glowed with a warm amber light. Walt stopped at the roadside, blinking against the glare. His fingers ached, his stomach hollow. Juniper nudged his shoulder, steam rising from her muzzle. "Yeah," he whispered. "Coffee sounds like heaven." He tied her to a post near the diner's side lot, patting her neck. "Stay close, girl. I'll get you something too." Inside, the bell above the door jingled. The smell hit him first. Bacon grease, coffee grounds, and maple syrup. The scent of a world he no longer belonged to. Conversation hummed softly among the morning crowd. Ranchers in flannel, truckers thawing their hands, a radio whispering country music. From behind the counter, a woman with silver-streaked hair looked up. Her name tag read May. She studied him for a moment. The beard, the patched coat, the eyes that seemed to belong to someone much older than his body. "Cold out there," she said, her voice gentle but steady. "Colder than it should be," Walt replied, lowering himself onto a stool. His joints popped like dry twigs. "What'll it be?" "Just coffee," he said. Then after a pause, "Black." May poured without another question. The cup trembled slightly in his hands. The first sip burned his tongue, but it was the kind of pain that reminded him he was still alive. Through the window, he saw Juniper shifting her weight, the wind tugging at her mane. She stood proud, despite her condition, the blanket still around her back. A couple of customers followed his gaze. One of them, a ranch hand, smirked. "Ain't that your horse?" "Mine?" Walt gave a half shrug. "Guess so, for now." The man laughed. "Looks like she's seen better days." May shot him a look that shut him up quick. Then she turned to Walt. "You from around here?" He shook his head. "Was, a long time ago." Her eyes softened. "You take care of that mare?" I'm trying. Something in the way he said it, quiet, ashamed, honest, made her pause. She reached for the pie display and cut him a small slice. On the house, she said, and I've got some apple peels out back if she'll eat them. Walt stared at her. That's kind of you. Kindness is cheaper than judgment, May said simply. Outside, he fed Juniper the peels. She chewed slowly, her lips sticky with frost and sweetness. Walt smiled faintly, brushing the snow from her mane. You see that, girl? Some folks still got hearts. May watched from the window, arms crossed. She didn't know who he was, but something about the scene caught her, the care in his hands, the way he talked to the horse as if she could answer. When he stepped back inside to thank her, she was refilling mugs for the regulars. You work with horses? She asked without looking up. Used to, he said. Saddles mostly, before the world went sideways. You still got the hands for it, she replied, glancing at his calloused fingers. He looked at them too, cracked, lined, raw from the cold. Hands remember what hearts forget, he murmured. May didn't reply. She just slid another refill toward him. When he finally rose to leave, the diner had emptied, leaving only the hum of the radio. You'll be back, she said quietly. He hesitated at the door. How you know? Because people who talk to animals like that don't disappear, she said. They just circle back when they're ready. Outside, Juniper was waiting, stamping her hoof against the cold pavement. Walt stroked her neck. We got a friend now, he said. Didn't expect that. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of coffee and fried eggs out into the open air. Walt tightened the rope around his hand and led Juniper down the road. The snow had stopped, and the sky had turned pale blue, like a promise not yet kept. Behind them, May watched through the diner window until they disappeared beyond the ridge. She didn't know why, but she whispered a quiet prayer for the stranger and his broken horse. And as the day faded over the mountains, the sound of a harmonica drifted faintly through the cold, a tune both sad and beautiful, echoing across the empty fields of Montana. The sky over Livingston had turned pale and thin, like paper left too long under the sun. Snowmelt trickled through the cracks of the road, and the world smelled of iron and pine sap. Walt led Juniper back toward the edge of the rail yard, where the rusted cars sat in silence like ghosts of another century. He chose the one with the least broken windows, a boxcar with faded red paint, and a door that still half slid on its track. It wasn't a home, but it would do. Juniper lowered her head and sniffed the air before stepping inside. Walt followed, his breath fogging in the stillness. He found a dented oil barrel outside and rolled it in. The clang echoed down the line like a bell. He filled it with scraps of wood and lit a small fire inside, the smoke curling up through the cracks. That's when he heard a voice behind him. You can't burn in those. The fumes'll choke you. He turned. A boy stood at the edge of the boxcar, maybe 15, skinny as a fence post and wearing a wool cap too big for his head. He held a pitchfork, like it was both weapon and walking stick. Didn't have much choice, Walt said. You got a better idea? The boy shrugged. Got an old steel drum at the ranch. Doesn't smoke as bad. I can bring it over. Ranch? Reed Place, the boy said proudly. My dad runs it. I'm Lucas. Walt nodded once. Appreciate it, Lucas. The boy peered past him at Juniper. She yours? Walt hesitated. She's with me. Lucas stepped closer, cautious but curious. Juniper's ears flicked toward him, her cloudy eye catching the firelight. She's beautiful, the boy whispered. Just needs some rest. She's had too many winters, Walt replied. Lucas squatted, his breath visible in the air. "We got feed back home. I can sneak some over. Boss won't notice." Walt frowned. "Don't get yourself in trouble." "Trouble's just another word for doing the right thing," the boy said with a grin. The man couldn't help but smile. "You talk too much for someone your age." "And you don't talk enough," Lucas shot back. The two of them worked quietly after that. Lucas fetched hay and a dented bucket of water from the creek, while Walt checked Juniper's hooves. One was split near the edge. He trimmed it carefully with a rusted knife, humming as he worked. The horse shifted once, but didn't pull away. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. When they paused to rest, Lucas looked around the boxcar. "You used to live here?" Walt shook his head. "No, just stopping over." The boy tilted his head. "You talk like someone who's been moving a long time." Walt didn't answer right away. He picked up a piece of wire, twisting it between his fingers. "Sometimes moving's easier than staying." Lucas studied him for a moment. "You ever think of working again? At a ranch, maybe?" Walt let out a quiet laugh. "Ain't nobody hiring an old saddle maker who smells like smoke and bad coffee." "I'd hire you," Lucas said simply. That silenced him. Outside, a freight train rumbled by, shaking the boxcar. Through the doorway, the light from the engine's headlamp swept over them. Two silhouettes, one old, one young, the horse between them. For a second, Walt saw his younger self in the boy's wide-eyed hope, and it hurt more than he expected. When the noise faded, Lucas spoke again. "You got family somewhere?" Walt's jaw tightened. "Had." The boy nodded, sensing the line he shouldn't cross. "Sorry." Walt poked at the fire. "Don't be. Some things burn out whether we want them to or not." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It felt almost sacred, like the pause between breaths when neither person wants to break the moment. Finally, Lucas stood. "I should head back before dark. I'll bring that clean drum tomorrow, maybe some oats too." Walt looked up. "You don't owe me a thing, son." "I know," Lucas said, already walking toward the road. "But I owe her." He pointed toward Juniper, who had lowered her head to drink from the bucket. Walt watched the boy disappear into the fading light. The cold settled again, but softer now. He turned to Juniper, who raised her head and looked at him as if asking what he thought of the kid. "He's got heart," Walt said quietly. "That's rare." The horse snorted, the sound small and warm. Walt smiled. "Don't worry, girl. We'll keep moving, just not tonight." He lay back against the wooden wall, listening to the crackle of the fire inside the barrel and the faint rustle of Juniper's breath. Outside, the stars began to bloom one by one over Montana, sharp, bright, endless. For the first time in a long while, Walt didn't feel invisible. Somewhere between the boy's grin and the horse's quiet trust, a tiny ember had begun to glow again inside him. Not enough to burn, but enough to light the way forward. The next few days passed in a rhythm of quiet survival. Walt repaired the cracks in the old boxcar with cardboard and tape Lucas had brought from the ranch. Juniper seemed stronger. Her steps grew surer, and the limp lessened, though her scarred flank still twitched at sudden noises. Walt brushed her coat each morning, his hands steady now, guided by memory. He had forgotten what it felt like to take care of something that needed him. One afternoon, while he was mending a piece of rope near the tracks, a pickup slowed on the road above. A man leaned out the window, eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. "You the fella keeping that horse down there?" Walt looked up, shading his face from the glare. Guess I am. Town's talking, the man said, his tone flat. You can't just camp out with an animal in public land. Sheriff might not like it. Walt didn't answer, and the truck drove off, spraying gravel. The echo of the engine faded, leaving behind the faint hum of the wind over metal. Later that day, Lucas returned with the steel drum and a small sack of oats. He noticed Walt's silence. Someone bother you? Nothing new, Walt muttered. Lucas glanced toward the road. People around here think they know everything. They don't. Walt sighed. Don't be too hard on them. They just ain't used to looking down at the edges. That evening, the light turned gold over the mountains. Juniper grazed quietly near the fence line, while Walt cleaned her hooves. Lucas sat nearby, tossing pebbles at an empty can. The sound echoed through the rail yard, soft and lonely. Why do you stay out here? The boy asked. Walt paused, leaning on the rasp. Because sometimes the only way to stay human is to be away from people. Lucas frowned. That's not true. Maybe not for you. The boy didn't argue. He knew enough to leave silence where words couldn't reach. The next morning, Walt walked Juniper toward the diner. He wanted to thank May for the apples and see if she might know anyone selling hay cheap. The streets of Livingston were half buried in slush, the kind that turned boots into ice weights. He tied Juniper to the hitching post outside the diner and stepped in. May looked up from wiping the counter. Well, I'll be. You brought her with you. She likes the smell of bacon, Walt said. May smiled faintly. Who doesn't? She poured him coffee without asking. Before Walt could reply, two ranchers in the corner booth started whispering. One snorted. That's the guy sleeping out by the tracks. Heard he's feeding a crippled horse. Folks say it's dangerous. Disease or something? Walt's hands tightened around the mug. May's eyes flicked to his. Ignore them, she said softly. But the words stuck in the air like smoke. Dangerous. Disease. Words that could turn pity into contempt. Walt stood to leave, but May touched his arm. Wait. She slipped a small paper bag across the counter. Apple cores again. Don't let them make you forget you're doing right. He nodded, his throat tight. Appreciate it. Outside, Juniper's ears swiveled toward him as he approached. Her breath fogged in the cold, and for a moment Walt thought how strange it was. A man with nothing, being whispered about by people who had everything. He fed her the apples, slow and gentle. That afternoon, the sheriff came. Cole Brannigan was built like a wall, broad shoulders, clean shave, eyes that had seen too much. His cruiser rolled up beside the rail yard. Walt watched from a distance as the man got out, adjusting his hat against the wind. You Walt Mercer? Used to be. Got reports you're keeping livestock on town property. That true? Guess it is, Walt said evenly. She ain't hurting nobody. Cole studied the horse. She's underweight. She's healing. The sheriff looked at him for a long moment. Something in Walt's calm seemed to disarm him. You got somewhere to take her if it snows again? I'll figure it out. That ain't an answer. It's the only one I got. Cole exhaled, frost forming in the air. Look, Mercer, I'm not the bad guy here, but the council's been touchy about vagrancy complaints. Folks don't like what they don't understand. Walt met his gaze. Yeah, been hearing that my whole life. For a heartbeat, the two men just stood there. One bound by law, the other by stubborn pride. Then the sheriff nodded toward the horse. Keep her out of sight best you can. I'll pretend I didn't see nothing today. Obliged, Walt said quietly. As the cruiser pulled away, Walt turned back to Juniper. The horse brushed her muzzle against his sleeve, and he felt her warmth through the fabric. Steady, forgiving. He stroked her neck. "Guess not everyone's looking away," he murmured. That night, the moon rose full over the yard, washing everything in silver. Walt sat beside the fire, the harmonica resting on his knee, but silent. He didn't need music tonight. The sound of Juniper's breathing was enough. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote called, its cry rolling through the emptiness like a warning. Walt looked out across the tracks, where the town lights shimmered faintly beyond the fog. He didn't know it yet, but the real storm was coming. And this time, it wouldn't be made of snow. The cold broke a little that week, leaving a mist that clung to the trees like old breath. Walt woke early, before the freight yard stirred, his back stiff from the wooden floor of the boxcar. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Juniper stood outside, steam curling from her nostrils, her mane glinting faintly under the pale dawn. He reached for the small tin cup near the fire barrel and poured water over his hands. The cold bit through his skin, but it felt good, clean, sharp, like beginning again. Then he took out the harmonica. He hadn't touched it since that first night under the bridge. The metal was cold, but the moment it met his lips, something inside him shifted. The notes were slow and low, threading through the fog like a heartbeat. Juniper raised her head at once, ears flicking forward. She stepped closer, her hooves crunching softly on the frozen dirt. Walt smiled around the music. "You remember this one," he said between breaths. "Wayfaring Stranger. That's our song now." The sound floated out into the stillness, fragile, human, imperfect. But there was warmth in it, a kind of quiet healing. It didn't matter that the harmonica wheezed or that Walt missed notes. It mattered that he was playing again, that the world hadn't taken this small piece of him away. Lucas showed up later with a grin and 2 thermoses, one with coffee, one with oats soaked in warm water. "Mom thinks I'm feeding the dogs," he said, handing Walt the first one. "Then I guess we better keep her believing that." The boy laughed and reached out to pat Juniper's neck. She let him. Walt noticed that her muscles didn't flinch anymore, that she trusted the boy's touch. "She likes you," he said. "Maybe she just likes the oats." "Don't ruin it with logic," Walt muttered, and Lucas laughed again. They worked together through the morning. Walt showed the boy how to check a saddle's girth strap for wear, how to run his palm along a horse's leg to find heat or swelling. His hands remembered without effort. For a man who'd spent years avoiding touch, the act of teaching, of guiding, felt like waking up. "You ever fix saddles for real cowboys?" Lucas asked. Walt smiled faintly. "Used to. Had a shop once, down by the old feed mill. People came from 3 counties over." "What happened?" Walt hesitated. The harmonica gleamed in his pocket. "Life happened," he said finally. "Got busy being unfair." Lucas nodded, pretending to understand. He was too young to know the shape of that kind of loss, but he could feel the weight of it. By noon, the mist lifted, revealing the blue bones of the mountains beyond town. Juniper's coat caught the light, and Walt saw how her color, once dull brown, had deepened, shining like wet cedar. She was healing. Same as him, though neither of them would have said it aloud. Later that day, May appeared at the edge of the tracks, her coat pulled tight around her. Walt hadn't seen her since that awkward morning in the diner. "Brought you something?" she said, holding up a bag. Leftover biscuits. Don't tell my regulars I spoil you. Wouldn't dream of it, Walt said. May's eyes softened when she saw Juniper. She looks better, stronger. She's a fighter, he said quietly. So are you. He looked away, embarrassed. I'm just stubborn. That's half of fighting. She smiled, then turned toward the horse. Mind if I? Juniper sniffed May's outstretched hand and gave a quiet snort, accepting her. May stroked her mane, fingers gentle. Beautiful creature, she whispered. She listens to music, Walt said. Can you believe that? May smiled. Maybe she listens to something deeper than we do. The three of them stood together for a while, man, woman, horse, the wind moving soft around them. It wasn't much, but for Walt, it felt like belonging. When May left, Walt returned to his harmonica. Lucas urged him to play something different this time, so he tried a tune his wife used to hum while stitching leather straps, a slow, lilting thing with no name. The sound wove through the afternoon air like smoke, catching the edges of the dying light. Juniper stepped closer again, eyes half closed, her breath sinking with the rhythm. For a moment, everything, the years of wandering, the cold nights, the looks from strangers, all of it slipped away. Lucas whispered, "It's like she understands the words." "She does," Walt said. "Not the ones we say. The ones we mean." The boy fell silent, and together they watched as Juniper leaned her head toward the fading sun. Walt kept playing, not for the crowd that would never come, not for the past that would never return, but for the small miracle of the present, this fragile piece, this proof that music could still heal what the world had broken. As dusk fell, a freight horn echoed in the distance. Walt lowered the harmonica and looked toward the horizon. "Tomorrow's going to be colder," he said. "Better stack more hay." Lucas nodded. "I'll bring some, and maybe we can play something new." Walt smiled faintly. "Maybe we can." He didn't say it aloud, but he felt it, a shift in the air, a slow reawakening of trust. In the hollow of the rail yard, surrounded by rust and frost, something living had taken root again. By morning, the fog had burned away, leaving the rails bright as knife edges under a thin Montana sun. Lucas came early with a square bale, and that eager grin that always made Walt feel younger than he was brought. "The good stuff," the boy said, cutting the twine and fluffing the hay. Juniper pushed her nose in, chewing with steady purpose, the small noises of contentment echoing inside the boxcar like a blessing. Walt felt the day tilt toward ordinary. Coffee from May later, a little brushing, maybe a new tune on the harmonica if his breath held. A simple plan, the kind that keeps a man upright. The truck rolled up before noon, white, with the municipal seal faded at the edges. A woman in a parka stepped out holding a clipboard and a bright orange envelope. She moved with the quick, efficient steps of someone paid to be unsentimental. "Mr. Mercer?" she called, though her eyes had already found the horse. Walt wiped his hands on his coat and stepped out into the light. "That's me. Rebecca Sloan, city clerk." She held out the envelope. "You've been observed housing livestock on public property without a permit, in violation of section... Well, all this is in the letter." Her voice wasn't cruel, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from repeating the same script to different faces. "You'll need to transfer the animal to the community stock facility by Friday. There are fines after that." "Friday," Walt repeated. It was Wednesday, and the wind had that wet edge that meant another Montana winter snap was coiling somewhere close. "She's not a problem." "I don't doubt your care," Sloane said, glancing at Juniper, whose ears flicked at the sudden metallic crack of the truck door. "But rules are rules." She looked past Walt to the boy. "You should be in school." "Snow day," Lucas lied, too quickly. Sloane pinched the bridge of her nose. "Mr. Mercer, there's a phone number for questions. I'd recommend calling. The facility is heated." She tacked a smaller copy of the notice to the chain-link fence with a staple gun. 3 sharp clicks. The sound knifed the air. Juniper flinched, hock quivering, head banging the doorframe. Walt moved without thinking, palm to her cheek, slow and steady. "It's okay, June," he murmured. "Just noise." Sloane watched the way the horse settled under his hand, the way the man's voice lowered like a blanket. For a second, her face softened. Then the bureaucrat's mask returned. "Friday," she said again, and drove off, the city seal shrinking to a dot in the dust. Lucas kicked a stone hard enough to send it skittering. "They can't do that." "They can," Walt said, turning the envelope over. The paper was too clean for a place like this. "And they will." "You won't take her there, will you?" Walt didn't answer. He slit the envelope with his thumbnail and read, "Transfer by Friday, intake fee, vaccination verification, proof of ownership, a list of things a man without a mailbox couldn't possibly have." He looked up at Juniper, the scar on her flank catching a ragged bar of sunlight, and felt the old heat rise behind his ribs. The shame of being the one who can't fill out the form, can't pay the fee, can't speak the language of people who never fell all the way through. It wasn't just pride. It was the knowledge that some kinds of order are colder than weather. He folded the letter carefully and slid it into his coat. "We'll talk to May," he said. "She knows what doors to knock." At the Northwind Diner, the bell above the door rang them into warmth. Steam and bacon and coffee. The usual trinity. May was refilling a trucker's mug, but her eyes were on Walt the moment he stepped inside. "What happened?" "They sent love notes," Walt said, laying the notice on the counter. The orange looked obscene against the clean laminate, like a wound you can't unsee. May read silently, jaw tightening by degrees. "The community facility's fine if your animal is a line item," she said. "If your animal is your life, it's different." "Friday," Walt said again, and hated how his voice carried that small thread of pleading. May slid the paper back. "I'll talk to Pastor Hale, and maybe the ladies from the Lions. We'll see who can grease what. Sheriff Cole might keep this on ice until after the weekend." Lucas leaned in. "Can't we just keep her out by the trees? No one will know?" "Someone always knows," May said softly, and her eyes flicked to the window, where a pair of ranchers had already turned their heads. Walt looked at the clock over the pie case. He had been a man with appointments once. Deadlines, invoices, orders to deliver before rodeo season. He used to know what to do when dates drew arrows toward him. Now the arrow felt like it was pointing at the place his heart had been. He swallowed, tasted metal, and straightened. "I won't let them put her in a pen with a price tag," he said. "She's not a stray dog. She's Juniper." May's voice was practical, but it held a thread of music. "Then we buy time. That's what we can afford. Coffee's on the house. And take the meatloaf for later." "You keep feeding me for free, folks will think I'm a paying customer," Walt said, trying for lightness and almost making it. "Let them think what they want," she replied. "Thinking is cheaper than kindness." Back at the rail yard, Clouds were gathering from the west, heavy and pewter-colored. Lucas helped Walt move the boxcar fire drum to the leeward side and stack the hay higher. "We'll get you through this," the boy told Juniper, as if declarations could shift weather. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, a gentle, steady weight, and the boy's chin trembled with the effort not to cry. As dusk scraped its gray knuckles across the yard, Sheriff Cole's cruiser slid up. He got out slow, hat brim low against the wind. "Heard the city came by," he said. "They did," Walt answered. "Said Friday." Cole's gaze traveled from the notice on the fence to the horse, then back to the man. "If I were a betting man, I'd say weather's turning. Roads'll glaze up. That slows everything down." He didn't smile when he said it. He didn't have to. "I appreciate your meteorology," Walt said. Cole hooked his thumbs in his belt, looking at Juniper the way lawmen look at what they can't stop. "You keep her under cover. No complaints, no trash piling up, no noise. I can't erase the rules, but I can set my watch a little slow." When the cruiser left, the first flurries were already skittering sideways. Walt stood with his palm on Juniper's neck and felt the storm coming in through her skin. The tiny tremors, the way she shifted her weight to the stronger leg. He thought of the bright envelope, the staple gun's crack, the way fear lives in metal noises and in words like transfer and fee. He thought of his wife's harmonica in his pocket and the way music had stitched the morning together, and he couldn't bring himself to lift it to his mouth. Some days you don't sing at the sky. Some days you grit your teeth and build a wall against it. They worked until the light was gone, tarping, tying, bracing, the small, methodical labor that passes for hope. When they finished, Lucas's cheeks were raw with windburn and his eyelashes frosted. "You should go," Walt said. "Your folks will worry." "They always worry," the boy said, and didn't move. Walt gripped his shoulder. "Go anyway." Lucas nodded and turned toward the road. After a few steps, he looked back. "We're not going to lose her, are we?" Walt didn't lie. "I don't know." He let the words sit there, bare and honest. Then he added, as if laying a hand over something breakable, "But we're not going to let her stand alone." The boy nodded once and ran. Night took the yard whole. Snow began in earnest, soft at first, then thick. Walt sat just inside the boxcar door with Juniper's breath fogging his face, the letter heavy in his pocket, the world narrowing to the sound of her chewing and the far-off moan of the highway. He closed his eyes and pictured Friday as a shape he might step around if he watched the ground close enough. Outside, the wind found its voice, low and rising, the kind that turns icicles into knives. The kind that makes a man wrap his arms around what he can't afford to lose. When the gusts slammed the tarps and the rails started to sing, Juniper lifted her head and blew hard, as if answering a call only horses hear. Walt opened his eyes to the tilting darkness and said into the storm and to the animal and to whatever might be listening, "I'm here." He wasn't asking for mercy. He was making a promise. The storm answered by opening wider. Somewhere far off, a loose sign banged against metal, a flat, brutal clatter. Juniper shied, shoulder thudding the doorframe, and Walt rose, arms around her neck, speaking low, words without music. The snow came, sideways. The boxcar shuddered. Friday, he thought. And then he stopped thinking because thought was a luxury, and the night had decided to take even that. The snow that began as a whisper turned into a voice by morning. It howled between the freight cars, bending the small pine near the fence until its top scraped the ground. Walt woke to the sound of the tarps snapping like sails. The fire barrel was cold. His hands were numb. When he tried to stand, the boxcar swayed under the weight of the wind pressing against its side. Juniper was already awake, eyes wide and nostrils flaring, her breath bursting white into the gloom. She had never liked storms. The sound of metal, the rush of wind, something in her past had carved fear into her bones. Walt moved slowly, murmuring words that had no meaning except for the sound of them. "Easy, girl. We're all right. Just noise. Just air." The storm didn't listen. It tore through the yard with a force that felt personal. Walt threw on his coat and tried to secure the tarp again, the rope cutting cold lines into his palms. Snow slammed his face. He could barely see. The boxcar creaked. Somewhere behind him, a sheet of metal flew loose and vanished into the white. He knew they couldn't stay there. "Come on," he said to Juniper, gripping her lead. "We're moving under the bridge." But the horse wouldn't budge. She planted her hooves, trembling. The wind screamed across the rails. Walt pulled harder, voice rising. "Juniper, move." She reared, front hooves slicing the air, and for a heartbeat, the world hung still. The snow, the wind, even his breath. Then the mare came down hard, her hind leg catching on the loose plank that served as a ramp. The crack was sharp and final. She fell sideways, crashing against the doorway. "Damn it!" Walt dropped to his knees. The leg wasn't broken, not this time, but twisted, swelling already beneath the skin. Juniper's sides heaved. She tried to rise and couldn't. Walt cradled her head, pressing his forehead to hers. "It's all right. Don't fight it. You're safe. You hear me?" His voice shook. The wind answered with a moan that made the whole yard sound alive and angry. He stayed like that for what felt like hours, his body curved protectively over hers, the snow piling on his back. By afternoon, the storm turned to sleet, then to ice, sharp little needles stinging their faces. The harmonica slipped from his pocket and fell into the slush. He didn't notice until later, when the light had gone and everything was gray. He picked it up, bent nearly in half from the fall. The metal was cold, warped. He tried a note, nothing but a thin wheeze. The sound broke him in a way the storm hadn't. He closed his fist around the harmonica and pressed it to his heart. Hours passed. The snow eased, leaving the world heavy and silent. Walt's shoulders ached. His fingers had gone stiff. He wanted to move, to fetch water or a blanket, but the weight of exhaustion pinned him down. He could feel Juniper's pulse under his hands, faint but steady. He whispered to her, voice raw. "You remember the boy? Lucas? He'll be here tomorrow. He'll bring oats. He's got this laugh that could melt a snowbank. You'll like that." The horse's ear twitched. That tiny movement, that spark of response, kept him talking. He told her about May's diner, about the sound of the coffee machine, about the warmth he hadn't known he missed. He told her things he hadn't said to another soul in 10 years. How he lost the shop. How his wife's harmonica had been the last thing she touched before the hospital took her. "Funny, ain't it?" he whispered. "How something so small can sound like forgiveness." But the harmonica in his hand stayed silent. When darkness came, the wind returned, gentler now, but colder. Walt pulled the torn tarp over both of them. His body shook uncontrollably, but he didn't move away from the horse. He rested his cheek against her neck, feeling her breath rise and fall. Every inhale was a prayer. Every exhale a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. Sometime in the night, a sound cut through the quiet. Not the storm, not the wind, but footsteps crunching over ice. A flashlight beam swept across the yard, catching the glint of the boxcar's rust. Walt looked up. "Mr. Mercer!" It was Sheriff Cole's voice. "You alive in there?" "Barely," Walt called back. Cole climbed up, boots slipping on the frozen metal. He looked at the scene, the man, the horse, the wreckage, and shook his head. "Jesus, Walt, you're one stubborn fool." "Guess so." Cole crouched, checking Juniper's leg. "She'll live if we get her warm." "Then let's get her warm." Together they worked in the freezing dark, hauling hay and canvas, building a crude shelter beside the boxcar. The sheriff's flashlight threw long, trembling shadows across the snow. When they finished, both men were shaking from cold and effort. Cole straightened up. "Weather's not letting up. I can't promise the city won't come back next week, but tonight she's safe." Walt nodded, too tired to speak. The sheriff hesitated, then added quietly, "You don't have to do this alone, you know." "Maybe not," Walt said, "but it's how I remember I'm still here." Cole didn't argue. He just clapped Walt on the shoulder and disappeared into the storm. When the footsteps faded, Walt turned back to Juniper. Her breathing had steadied, her eyes half closed. He sank down beside her, pulling the torn tarp higher. The harmonica lay between them, bent and useless. Outside, the last of the sleet turned to powder, drifting soft over the wrecked yard. Walt whispered into the dark, "If I lose you, girl, I don't think I'll find my way back." Juniper exhaled, the sound low and tired. Walt took that as an answer. Not hope, not surrender, just the truth between two creatures who had outlasted too many storms. He closed his eyes, letting the cold bite through his coat. Somewhere far off, a train horn moaned. And for the first time since the brawl of wind began, Walt didn't feel the need to brace against it. By the time the sun broke through, the storm had already stripped the yard bare. The snow glittered like powdered glass, the kind that cuts if you look too close. Walt stirred awake beneath the half-collapsed tarp, every bone aching. He couldn't tell if the pain came from cold or age, or the simple cost of not giving up. Juniper was still beside him, her breath rising in soft clouds. When he touched her neck, the skin was warm again. That was enough to start the day. He pulled himself up, knees crackling. The world smelled of metal and thawing earth, the smell of things trying to begin again. He found the bent harmonica near the fire barrel and slipped it into his pocket. He didn't want to fix it yet. Some things needed to stay broken a while. By mid-morning, the crunch of boots came from the road. Walt turned to see May Hollister in her brown coat, a wool scarf tied tight around her hair, trudging through the snow with a basket on her arm. Behind her trailed Lucas, balancing a plank of wood across his shoulders. "God almighty," May said as she reached the boxcar. "You look like you lost a fight with the whole mountain." "Feels about right," Walt said, smiling crookedly. Lucas dropped the plank. "We brought nails. Sheriff said you'd need a new roof before nightfall." Walt looked from one to the other, disbelief warming his chest more than the weak sunlight ever could. "You two didn't have to—" May cut him off. "We did. Because the world doesn't work right unless people do what they don't have to." Together, they began to rebuild. Lucas hammered. Walt held the boards, May fetched water from the creek and wrapped a torn blanket around Juniper's leg. The work was slow, fingers numb and clumsy, but laughter snuck in between the hammer blows. The sound startled Walt the first time it came. His own laughter, low and rusty like an engine that hadn't turned in years. When the roof stood solid again, they lit a new fire. May unpacked her basket. Biscuits, a jar of honey, and a flask of coffee so strong it could wake the dead. She handed Walt a cup. "To stubborn men and lucky horses," she said. He raised it slightly. "To stubborn women who show up anyway." Lucas grinned. "To all of us, then." They drank. The air between them felt easier now, as if the storm had cleared more than the sky. Later, while Lucas trimmed the ragged ends of the tarp, May stood watching Juniper. "She's tougher than she looks," she said. "She's got reason to be," Walt replied. May's gaze shifted to him. "And you?" He took a long breath. "I'm learning." "Good," she said, "'cause the town's still whispering. Some folks think you should move on. Others say they'd chip in to help you get a proper stall built." Walt frowned. "Why would they do that?" "Because people remember decency when they see it. Takes time, but they do." Her words settled over him like the falling ash from the fire. He wasn't sure he believed them yet, but he wanted to. That, he figured, was a start. When May and Lucas left near dusk, the yard was quiet again. The sky burned orange behind the ridgeline, and a single hawk circled overhead. Walt sat by the new fire, listening to the wood crack and sigh. He thought of the sheriff's words, of the city letter folded still in his coat pocket, and felt the smallest pulse of something he hadn't felt in a decade. Belonging. A sound stirred him. Not the wind, not the train. Voices. He turned and saw two figures walking down from the road, carrying more lumber. Behind them came a third, then a fourth. Ranch hands, townsfolk, even the man who had once mocked him in the diner. No one spoke much. They just nodded, set down their loads, and got to work. Walt stood frozen, unsure whether to help or hide. May must have said something, he realized. Maybe the sheriff, too. Maybe the story of the horse and the man who stayed through the storm had made its rounds. A farmer in a red flannel handed him a hammer. "You can't fight a Montana winter with one wall," the man said gruffly. "Let's do it right." So they did. The rhythm of nails and saws filled the air, joined by the hiss of snow sliding off the roofs they built. Someone brought a lantern. Someone else, more hay. By midnight, a small, sturdy shelter stood beside the boxcar, smoke curling from its stovepipe. Juniper lay inside, head resting against a blanket that smelled faintly of May's diner. When the last neighbor left, Walt stood outside the doorway, lantern light haloing him in gold. He looked at his rough hands, blistered and cracked, and thought of all the years they had built nothing but regret. Tonight, they had built walls that could hold warmth. Lucas came running back down the hill, cheeks flushed. "Mom says you got a roof over your head now. She wants you to stop calling yourself homeless." Walt chuckled. "Tell her I'll think about it." The boy hesitated. "You know, my dad says people like you, people who still take care of things that can't pay them back, they're the reason small towns survive." Walt's throat tightened. "Your dad sounds smarter than he looks." Lucas grinned, pleased at the joke, and ran off again. Walt turned back to the shelter. Juniper's breathing filled the night, slow and sure. He placed a hand on the new door frame, the wood warm from the fire within, and whispered, "We made it through, girl." She shifted, half asleep, and blew softly through her nose, a sound like a sigh of agreement. Walt looked up. The stars were out in full, clean and sharp, and for the first time in years, he felt no need to count them, miles between himself and anyone else. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, more rules, maybe another storm, but tonight he was surrounded by proof that not everything leaves. Some things, against all odds, stay. He sat by the fire until dawn began to tint the horizon. The harmonica rested beside him, silent but safe. He didn't play it, not yet. Sometimes music lived best in the spaces between notes, in the hands that stayed when everything else tried to go. Winter came back hard in December. The air turned thin and sharp, and every breath burned like a small fire inside the chest. Walt stood outside the shelter one morning, watching frost creep across the riverbank like a living thing. The town beyond looked frozen in glass. Christmas lights tangled around porch rails, smoke rising from chimneys in slow, heavy curls. May's diner gleamed in the distance, its windows fogged with laughter and heat. He could almost hear the jingle of the doorbell from here. For the first time in years, Walt didn't feel like a shadow moving around the edges. He felt part of the world again, still outside, but close enough to feel its warmth. Juniper's breath rose in soft clouds beside him. Her leg had healed well. She was stronger, more sure-footed now. Every day, she seemed to reclaim another piece of herself. When Walt brushed her coat, he could feel muscle beneath the fur again. The scars didn't vanish, but they stopped defining her. Lucas came running up the path, cheeks flushed from the cold. "You coming into town for the parade?" he asked, panting. "May says they're lighting the big spruce tonight." "I think I'll stay here," Walt said, pulling his coat tighter. "She'll be mad if you don't show," Lucas warned. "She made pie. Pecan." Walt smiled. "She'll forgive me." But later that evening, when he saw the faint glow of lights reflecting off the low clouds, he felt the tug. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to walk into town for a bit. Maybe belonging was something you had to practice. He saddled Juniper slowly, his hands sure but gentle. "It's been a while since we rode anywhere just for the view," he told her. She flicked her tail as if she'd been waiting for him to say it. They followed the frozen trail along the river, moonlight spreading over the ice in silver sheets. The world was so quiet, he could hear the creak of her hooves and the faint groan of the river shifting beneath. By the time they reached Main Street, the parade had already started. Children marched in wool coats carrying lanterns. An old tractor pulled a float draped in tinsel. The band from the high school played off-key carols, and the whole thing was perfectly imperfect. Walt tied Juniper near the fence and stood beside Lucas and May as fireworks cracked overhead, scattering color against the dark. "See?" May said, bumping his arm. "Not so bad being part of the living, is it?" He chuckled. "Still feels strange. It should," she said. "That's how you know it's real." Then came the sound, a sharp, metallic shriek cutting through the laughter. The crowd turned toward the bridge that spanned the river just outside town. A small bus, its headlights dim behind the frost, had skidded sideways halfway across. The metal guardrail crumpled like foil. Screams followed. "Dear Lord," May whispered. Walt's blood went cold. The bus was listing toward the river, wheels spinning helplessly. He could see faces in the windows, children, wide-eyed and frozen. The town fell silent for a second that felt endless. Then everything moved at once, People shouted for ropes, for help, for someone to call the sheriff. Walt was already running. His boots hit the icy planks of the bridge, each step a gamble between balance and disaster. The driver was pounding at the door, trying to force it open. Walt shouted, "Stay still! Don't move!" The sound of cracking ice answered him. Behind him, Juniper whinnied, sharp, urgent. She'd pulled free of the fence, hooves striking sparks on the frozen road as she approached. Her breath came out like smoke, her eyes fixed on him. Walt turned. "No, girl. Stay back." But she didn't. She stepped onto the bridge, her weight sure and deliberate, the same patience she'd learned in the quiet mornings when he brushed her coat. Every step was a prayer answered by the creak of wood and the groan of metal. "Walt!" May screamed from the road. "The ice! Don't you dare!" He didn't look back. "Get me a rope!" he yelled. "Now!" Lucas came running, dragging a coil he'd found in the back of someone's truck. Walt grabbed it, looped it around Juniper's chest, and tied the other end to the bridge railing. "You hold steady," he whispered to her, pressing his hand against her neck. She snorted once, firm and unafraid. Then he crawled forward toward the bus, the rope tightening behind him, the mare anchoring him to the only solid thing left. He reached the door and pounded once. "Can you open it?" The driver's face was pale. "It's jammed." "Kick it!" Walt shouted. He braced himself as the man slammed his shoulder against the latch. It gave with a metallic snap. Inside, the children were crying, huddled against the seats. "One at a time," Walt ordered. "Grab the rope and crawl toward the road. Don't look down." The first kid slipped, caught the rope, and slid toward safety. The crowd on the bank pulled him in. One by one, the others followed. The bridge moaned under their weight, boards cracking like gunshots. Juniper held steady. Every time the rope jerked, she dug her hooves deeper, head bowed against the pull. Walt could see her muscles trembling, the steam rising off her back. "That's it, girl," he murmured. "Hold on." The last child was halfway across when the bridge let out a sound like thunder. The planks beneath Walt gave way, plunging his legs through to the freezing water below. He gasped, pain slicing up his spine. The rope went slack for an instant, then pulled tight again as Juniper stepped forward, taking the weight. "Pull!" someone shouted. The townsfolk grabbed the rope and heaved. Walt felt the strain in every joint, the burn of the cold biting through his clothes. The last child reached solid ground. Then came the final crack. The beam under Juniper's hind legs splintered. She stumbled, her front hooves sliding. Without thinking, Walt lunged, throwing his arms around her neck, trying to push her back toward the shore. "Go, June!" he yelled. "Go!" But she wouldn't leave him. The mare's body quivered, breath ragged. For one impossible second, their eyes met, hers wide, unblinking, full of the same stubborn fire that had kept them alive through every storm. "Please," he whispered, "don't do this for me." Juniper shifted her weight, muscles tensing, and with a surge of strength pushed back against the breaking wood. Walt felt the rope snap against his chest as she jerked her head upward, pulling him free of the gap. He landed hard on the ice, lungs burning. Hands grabbed him, Lucas, May, strangers whose faces blurred in the cold. Behind him, the mare stumbled onto the last plank, her sides heaving. The bridge groaned one final time, then stilled. The crowd erupted, voices blending with the wind and the river's roar. Walt turned, gasping. Juniper stood trembling in the snow, her breath cutting the air like fire, her mane glittering with frost. He reached her and pressed his forehead to hers. "You did it, girl," he whispered. "You brought them home." She closed her eyes, leaning into him. Around them, sirens wailed and people cried, but for that heartbeat of silence between them, there was only gratitude. Raw, wordless, and whole. The world after the rescue was a blur of noise and cold light. Sirens painted the snow in red and blue streaks. Voices rose and broke against the wind, and somewhere in the chaos, Walt could hear the sound of children crying. Not in fear anymore, but in relief. He sat in the snow beside Juniper, unable to move, his lungs tearing for air. His coat was soaked through, his boots filled with ice water. But he didn't feel the cold. He only felt the weight of her head pressing gently against his shoulder, her breath shaking but steady. "Don't you pass out on me, old man." May's voice cut through the haze. She was kneeling beside him, cheeks wet with melted snow and tears. "You need to get warm." Walt shook his head. She needs... "She's fine," May said firmly. "You both are. Sheriff's on his way." Juniper flinched as the crowd pushed closer, the noise of boots and radios filling the bridge. Walt stood, shielding her with his body. "Back up," he shouted hoarsely. "Give her space." His voice cracked, but the authority in it made people listen. Sheriff Cole arrived a moment later, hat pulled low against the wind. He looked at the wrecked bridge, then at Walt. "Hell of a thing you did," he said quietly. Walt's throat ached. "She did it," he said, nodding toward Juniper. Cole looked at the mare, who was standing still despite the chaos, her chest rising and falling like a forge bellows. "Well," he said, voice rough, "then I guess she just saved half the county's choir." The driver of the bus came over, eyes wide, hands trembling. "You could have died out there. Why'd you risk it?" Walt met his gaze. "Because she didn't hesitate. So neither could I." The man nodded, words lost to the cold. Around them, the townsfolk were quiet now, watching as if they'd all witnessed something sacred, something that didn't need to be spoken. May touched Walt's arm. "Come on. Let's get you home." "Home," he repeated softly. The word didn't sting anymore. They led Juniper off the bridge, slow and careful. Each step left deep prints in the snow, black and shining. The rope still hung from her chest, frayed and wet, trailing behind like a line between one life and the next. At the diner, May and Lucas cleared space in the storage shed, lining it with blankets and hay. Walt guided Juniper inside. The mare lowered herself with a tired groan, folding her legs beneath her. Walt sank to his knees beside her, brushing the ice from her mane. "You did good, girl," he whispered. "Better than good." Lucas knelt too, awe softening his voice. "She's not just a horse, is she?" Walt smiled faintly. "No, son, she's proof." "Of what?" "That sometimes what's broken still saves the day." May handed him a towel and a mug of coffee. "You should rest. The town's not going to forget this, Walt." "I ain't looking to be remembered." "Too late," she said, smiling. That night, after the others had gone home, Walt sat alone beside Juniper. The wind had died, leaving only the faint hum of the highway and the ticking of the diner's neon sign. He pulled the harmonica from his pocket, bent, tarnished, but still whole. He turned it in his hands, tracing the dents with his thumb. "Guess it's time we tried again," he murmured. He lifted it to his lips, and blue. The first note came out crooked, but the second rang clear. Then came another, and another, soft and cracked, yet filled with a quiet strength. The melody floated through the shed, rising with the warmth of Juniper's breath. She stirred, ears twitching, and then let out a low, answering rumble deep in her throat. Not fear, not pain, but recognition. Walt smiled through tears he hadn't meant to shed. The door creaked open behind him. Sheriff Cole stood there, hat in his hands. "Could hear you from the road," he said. "Sounds like the old world coming back to life." Walt shrugged. "Just trying to make sure it's still in tune." Cole nodded toward Juniper. "The mayor's talking about some kind of commendation, a ceremony." "I don't need medals," Walt said. "She doesn't either." "I know," Cole said quietly. "But maybe the town does." He left after that, closing the door gently. Walt kept playing, the notes shifting into something slower, a lullaby made from memory. He remembered his wife, her hands sewing leather straps, her laughter when he missed a note. He remembered the shop that used to smell of oak and oil. He remembered who he was before he forgot how to be anyone. When the song ended, he set the harmonica down and looked at Juniper. "We did good, didn't we?" The mayor blinked, the kind of slow blink that feels like an answer. Walt reached out and laid his hand against her muzzle. "Rest, girl. We've earned it." He stayed there until dawn, the rope still looped around his wrist, the air inside the shed warm from their breath. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The town was still asleep, but soon they'd wake to the story. The one about a man who had nothing and a horse who gave everything. About a night when mercy and courage met on a bridge made of ice. As the first light touched the diner's window, Walt whispered a single word into the quiet. "Thanks." Juniper's ear twitched once, and then she slept. Spring came slow to Montana that year, hesitant as an old song relearned by heart. The snow melted in uneven patches, revealing grass the color of wet hay and earth still holding the chill of winter. Walt Mercer stood outside May's diner, coat open, the sun soft against his face. The air smelled of thawing soil and coffee, the kind of scent that makes a man believe the world still knows how to forgive. Behind the diner, a new fence gleamed in the light, sturdy posts of pine, joined by rails that Lucas and the townsfolk had painted white just a week ago. In its center stood a simple wooden sign, Juniper's Yard. Walt had carved it himself with a dull pocket knife, each letter uneven but proud. Juniper grazed nearby, her coat catching flecks of sunlight. The scar along her flank had faded to a thin line, silver against her skin. Children came by after school to bring her apples. Older folks brought cameras, pretending not to tear up as they watched her move. The mare didn't mind the visitors. She'd lift her head, let them pet her neck, and sometimes, only sometimes, she'd close her eyes when Walt played the harmonica, as if remembering the bridge, the rope, the wind, and everything they'd both survived. May leaned on the porch rail, arms folded. "You realize she's more famous than half the town now?" Walt smiled. "She earned it." "Funny," May said. "Everyone keeps asking what happened to the man who saved all those kids. I told them he's still around, just quieter about it." He shrugged. "Hero's just another word people use when they don't know how to say thank you." May chuckled. "You and your words. You ever think of giving a speech when the mayor unveils that plaque next week?" "Me?" Walt shook his head. "I wouldn't know what to say." "You'd find it," she said. "You always do." Lucas came running across the lot, a hammer in one hand, his hat lopsided. "Fence gate's fixed," he announced. "I added the latch like you showed me." "Good work," Walt said. "Straight lines, tight joints. You'll be building barns next." The boy grinned. "You think so?" "I know so. You got the hands for it." Lucas puffed his chest a little. "Guess I had a good teacher." Walt looked at him, really looked, and saw something familiar. The same restless light he'd once had before the world turned heavy. "You keep learning," he said quietly. "And don't forget why you build things. It's not just wood and nails. It's a promise that something will stand when the wind comes back." Lucas nodded, serious now, and ran off to chase a loose chicken from the road. May shook her head. "You're getting sentimental, Walt Mercer." "Maybe," he said, "but I've learned worse habits." As the afternoon passed, more people arrived. The sheriff stopped by with fresh hay. A farmer brought a bag of carrots. Even Rebecca Sloan, the city clerk, came carrying a donation envelope. "Town council took up a collection," she said awkwardly. "For feed, and maybe for a roof, if you ever want to build one." Walt took the envelope, smiling. Guess the rule book had room for kindness after all. Sloan blushed. "Turns out rules don't change towns. People do." When she left, Walt walked to the fence and watched Juniper lift her head toward the breeze. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the harmonica, polished now, its dents smoothed by time and care, and began to play. The tune was soft, unhurried, something halfway between sorrow and joy. The notes drifted across the yard, over the diner, out toward the river that had once threatened to take them both. May stepped to the door, wiping her hands on a rag, and listened. The sound was simple, human, a kind of prayer without words. Juniper moved closer, her shadow stretching beside his. She pressed her nose to his shoulder, the same gesture from the night they met. But this time there was no fear, only recognition. "Yeah," Walt whispered between notes. "We made it, didn't we?" She snorted softly, breath warm against his sleeve. When the song ended, the small crowd outside the diner applauded quietly. Walt turned, surprised, and laughed, an easy, full laugh that felt new. He tipped his hat. "Guess I'll charge tickets next time." May smiled from the doorway. "You do that, and I'll raise the price of coffee." Evening settled in slow, the sky turning the color of faded denim. Walt leaned against the fence, watching the children wave goodbye, watching Lucas lead Juniper back to her stall. The neon sign of Northwind Diner flickered on, casting a soft red glow across the yard. He thought of his wife, of the harmonica that had carried her breath, of the night he'd met a broken horse under a storm that should have killed them both. Every detail came back. But without pain now, just gratitude. Before heading inside, he carved a final line beneath the sign with his knife. "For all who still believe in second chances." The wood splintered under his touch, rough but true. He stepped back, reading it under the porch light. The words didn't need polish. They were enough. Later, when the diner lights dimmed and the town fell quiet, Walt walked once more to the fence. Juniper was lying in the straw, head resting easy. He placed a hand on the gate, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. "You gave me back more than I ever lost," he whispered. The night answered with crickets and wind through pine. Walt smiled, slipped the harmonica into his coat pocket, and turned toward the diner. Toward the laughter, the smell of coffee, and the hum of a world he finally belonged to again. Behind him, the sign swayed gently in the breeze, catching the last of the moonlight. Juniper's yard, where kindness found its way home. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. Just write Juniper so I know you were here till the end. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more true, heartwarming stories about hope, kindness, and second chances. I'll see you in the next story.